Hello, this is Michelle, and this is my Module 6 reflection. So, this week we really focused on makerspaces and the chapters um, from the online book. I chose chapter 4, which is Community, the Hidden Context for Learning. Um, but this chapter was really interesting because I had really only thought about makerspaces in the context of we have an engineering class on campus. And that's the only group that uses the makerspace. And I never really thought about the context of makerspaces in terms of an English classroom. Um, but even though we don't really have the context to build things particularly, um, a lot of the things that makerspaces use in the thinking process are similar to what I would like my students to be thinking about in my class. So, that really mindset of failure and revision is something that I would like to be incorporated within my classroom. A lot of times, students feel like core classes are you do what the teacher assigns you, you turn it in, and then that's the end of it. Um, but I would like my learners to go back, try again, improve, return in. And that can be difficult because we haven't really trained students to feel that way about school. So while I don't feel like a traditional makerspace um, will work in my classroom, I think the mindset will. Um, so making writing something where you're turning in drafts, you're tinkering, you're playing, you're trying to improve, you're returning in, um, and failure is not a bad thing. It can be used to improve um, and teach us something. So while a traditional physical makerspace won't work for me, a makerspace mindset will. Um, and then looking through a lot of the chapters, they seem to have a couple things in common, which is really about turning the physical location of your class into an important aspect of the way students learn. So my chapter was on community and explored design spaces, IT, online spaces, and physical structures. Um, and though most of it was in the context of a college classroom, I felt like a lot of it, or a college campus, a lot of it can be sort of augmented to a high school classroom. Um, Obviously, for the physical location, there's only so much I can do. Our classrooms are what they are. However, I think the idea of allowing students the opportunity to have input in the way the classroom is set up is going to um, improve the way that they learn. A lot of times, my seating is um, kind of stagnant. It stays the way it is for the majority of the year. However, there are times where I tell students to move desks, and maybe opening that to more of their input would improve um, their ability. I really do wish my students had those kind of rolly desks. Those would be really useful in my classroom, but we don't. We have the traditional desks. Um, I think the one that is most possible for me in my classroom in this chapter was the use of technology to create those online communities. So having multiple ways for students to be able to turn things in, to get in contact with me, to know what's coming, um, is going to open them up to success. So I have a Google Classroom because we're a Google Suite campus. Um, and we also have a program called Synergy that's sort of the online grade platform. And I think part of this is actually teaching the students how to use those programs because while I can send emails to all of my students and their parents, many of my students don't check their emails. So things that are sent to them are never actually seen. So to actually directly instructing them, directly teaching them on how to use these technologies that can support them, I think will help them in the long run. For instance, we did a project and each piece of the project was uploaded to Google Classroom in the thought that students could access it whenever they needed it. And it made my classroom less of the end all be all of information. They could access what we did in class outside of class. So if you're sick, if you're just distracted, you would have more opportunity to get what you need to. And there was a lot of success in that. But from a teacher standpoint, it takes a lot of pre-thinking that I'm not used to. So it does lead itself to a challenge, but a worthwhile one because the students have farther access. They talked about the roadblocks of lack of widespread use. My students have one-to-one devices on campus, but I teach in a low socioeconomic area in which many of my students don't necessarily have access outside of school hours. So while this is really great for students within the campus walls, once they leave school, it doesn't have as much of a lasting benefit, I think. So trying to figure a way for students to have more access, I try to be available to them as much as possible, which really I think goes into that pedagogy issue, which was the third kind of main bullet point of that chapter, which is really collaborating with students and encompassing a kind of more open experience. So the quote I picked from the chapter is, students meet with faculty in office spaces that are easy to find and conducive to dialogue. So I have my doors unlocked and I'm there before school, at lunch, most days after school, in an attempt to be as easily accessible as possible. Not just for my students, but maybe other students who need that kind of environment. But at the high school level, part of the challenge, of course, is helping students understand that choice is not only available but beneficial to them in the long run. I would like to, in this unit, really focus on using class time less to deliver content and more to do the actual work. I find that to be really challenging because it takes a lot of time to reverse those roles at the beginning. Sort of feels like reinventing the wheel, but I feel like when students work on projects and work together, they're learning more and experiencing more. So for my ID project, like I said, I won't have a traditional makerspace by any means. Mine, isn't open to me accessing it in the first place, but second off, it wouldn't really be beneficial to what my students need to do. However, I do think the mindset of a makerspace is something I need to more actively engage in to benefit my students. So I'm going to be trying to integrate more circular thinking, which really applies to the ADDIE model and many of the learning theories we talked about, right? This is not just a linear plan, it's that spiral, that circle effect of planning, developing, implementing, reflecting, trying it again. And I think putting the students in that position, that mindset, is only going to help them in the long run. And then from the chapter, I think many of it really applies to any classroom, regardless of it being a college campus, that students should be equal partners in as beneficial as a way as possible to meet their needs. So that's my takeaway from this unit. I felt like I was surprised how much of this unit related back to me, because when we started talking about makerspaces, I just thought this wasn't really going to have much to do with my classroom, but I was really surprised and I really enjoyed learning about it. All right, thank you.